So in a previous video, we talked about how one of the keys to success for this course is going to be your ability to debug your own code. So the thing is, it's very hard to write code that just works the first time, right? And being able to work through these bugs and figure out what's going on in your app is going to be a very critical skill. So in this video, we're going to go through a couple examples of bugs and look at how we could go about solving them so everybody can understand the process of debugging apps a little better and understand the messages that Android Studio gives us. So I'm going to pull up my app that I have built here. So what I have right now is a ToDo app. And this app has a few functionalities. You could add items to the list. So I could add an item to the list. And if I click add, it appears in my list here. And I could also click on an item to edit. So I could click on an item and it brings me to a new screen. And if I hit save and go back, then everything will work. Everything will be updated based on what the user had inputted. So this is my basic ToDo app, but now we're going to work through a couple of different bugs and see how we could go about solving them. So right now, there's a bug in my code, but I'm just going to run my app and see what happens. So I'm going to click the run button, I'm going to run it on my emulator, and we're going to see what happens. So the first thing to note is that our app did not successfully build. And we know that because this build panel popped up and it told us that the compilation failed when we hit the run button. So now what we want to do is kind of scroll down and see what exactly went wrong. So it looks like there's an error in edit item activity. So I'm just going to double click on this. And once I double click on it, it'll take me to the file and tell me exactly what was wrong. So the thing to also note here is that realize this file is underlined in red. And if I open up another file, this file won't be underlined in red. So when a file is underlined in red, that means there's something wrong in the file itself. So it looks like there's something wrong with my on-click listener. And now that I kind of remember it, I kind of typed this on-click listener by hand, if I remember correctly. And that probably introduced some kind of like typing error or spelling error. So when my button is clicked, when the save button is clicked, I really just want to call this method. So I'm going to try writing this again, but this time I'm going to use autocomplete to make sure that I don't type anything wrong. So notice that every time a suggestion pops up, I type the enter key so that it can autocomplete for me so I don't have to type everything by hand myself. And this is really great because it allows me to save time because I don't have to type everything by hand, but also it really reduces the number of mistakes I can make. So I'm just going to click on this and everything will just auto-generate for me. And notice that now when I do this, there's no error here. And it looks like the error that was originally here was that I spelled on-click with a capital O, and it's very case sensitive, so that's probably the error that was here. Yep, so if I change that to be lowercase, then everything is fine. So now that I know that was wrong, I'm just going to delete this and try building my app again. And realize down here there's a status bar saying Gradle build is running, and if this thing is still running, that means that the process is still going on and the package is still being installed into the emulator. Okay, so now it looks like the Gradle build finished successfully, and now my app is here and it works as expected again. Great, so we solved our first bug. Now let's move on to our second bug. Okay, so in our second bug, I don't know what the bug itself is, so I'm just going to run my app and see what happens. Okay, so now we see a different kind of build error, but again, this is a build error. So that means our app was not able to successfully build. And if I scroll here and double click on this, it will take me to exactly where the error is. So here, you realize that this file isn't underlined in red, but even though it's not underlined in red, there's actually still an error in it. As you see here, this view itself is underlined in red. And the problem here is that it doesn't know what wrap content means. And I think the reason for this is because I'm trying to set the layout width, but I didn't include the layout keyword. So if I included the layout keyword, then the error goes away. Okay, so now I'm going to try running my app again and see if that works. Great, so now it looks like my app is able to successfully build again, so that's great. And the key thing here is I'm going to go back and just make sure we have this error again. And the key thing to remember here is that when that build panel pops up, it'll tell you exactly why your app wasn't able to build successfully. And once you know that, you could double click on the error itself, and then it'll take you to directly where the error is. Okay, great. So now we've solved our second bug. Now let's go and try to see what our next bug is. So again, I don't know what the bug is, so I'm going to run my app and see what happens. Okay, so it was able to successfully build, but there must be an error somewhere, so I'm just going to create a couple items and see what happens. So that was fine. Now I'm going to click on a certain item to edit it. Oh, okay, so now the app crashes. So now let's figure out why this app has crashed. And to do that, we have to go into this logcat panel down here. So I open the logcat panel. Notice that I have the log error messages filtered to only show my app by having my app selected here, and also the option of show only selected application here. This means that I will only see log messages from my app, so I don't see all the random error messages that come from the emulator itself. And the second thing what I have here is I have the filter for verbose on for my log messages. So this means I will see every kind of log messages and not just the error ones. But if I had a crash, usually I like to filter for just error messages. And if I do that, then I can see exactly what the error was. So it looks like this is our stack trace for the crash. And the way to understand what the stack trace is telling you is it'll always tell you, it will always have a blue link for exactly what went wrong. And here we can see that something went wrong on line 31 of edit item activity. So I click on this, Android Studio will take me directly to that line. And then we look at what exactly caused this crash. So the problem here was that it said it tried to call this method setOnClickListener on a null object reference. So what that means is that it was trying to call the setOnClickListener, but this item here, so this item is trying to call setOnClickListener, but this item was null. So what that usually means is that this item is not in the layout file. So what I usually like to do here is I would open up the edit layout file for this activity. So it's activity edit underscore item. And then I like to split it in two so I can see both these files at the same time. And so it looks like here I was trying to set an onClick listener for the save button. So I'm trying to set an onClick listener for the save button here, but what's happening is that the save button wasn't able to be found. So if I click on the save button here, Android Studio will tell me exactly where this view is defined, and the ID for this view is button save. So what we should see here is find view by ID. Oh, okay, so the problem here is that we're setting the onClick listener on the wrong view. And if I click on Command B, it'll take me to exactly where this view was defined. And it looks like this view was actually defined in the main activity and not in edit item activity. That's why when edit item activity was trying to instantiate itself, it crashed, because it tried to set an onClick listener on a view that it doesn't even have. So I think what we need to do here is use the ID here and put it here instead. That way the onClick listener is set on the correct view. Okay, so now I'm going to run my app again and see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to create a couple of items. I'm going to click on it and hopefully be able to edit it. At least it doesn't crash now, so that's good. But I'm going to edit it and see if that works. Great, so that actually works. So we solved that bug as well. Now let's move on to our next bug. Okay, so again, I don't know what the bug is, so I'm just going to run my app and see what happens. Okay, so everything was able to build successfully. Now I'm going to create a couple of items. So that all seems to work. Now I'm going to try to edit one of these items. Oh, so now we see that the app has crashed again. So we go into our logcat. So I click on the logcat panel, and then I'm already filtered for error messages. And now we see that the error comes from this line here. And I had some comments here that explains what I was trying to do here. And it says that in this block of code, I was trying to put the cursor at the end of the text. Okay, so when I go into my edit item activity, I tried to put the cursor to the end of the text so that when the user is editing that string, they don't have to manually go all the way to the end of the text, right? And the problem here is that we were trying to call length on something null on line 26. So the place we call length is this thing here. And so this old text, whatever we have here, seems to be the problem because this is null. And this we see is first created here. This variable is first created here. And it comes from something where we tried to get the string that we got passed from main activity. So I'm going to open up main activity and see what's going on here. And again, I'm going to use it so that I can split it and see both at the same time. So in main activity, what happens is when I click on an item, I created a new intent to launch edit item activity, and then I put the string inside the intent with the key old item. And what I'm expecting here is I could use that same exact key to pull that string that we got passed from main activity. So it looks like the key I used here was old item, and the key we use here is also old item. Oh, okay, but the one thing that I realized is that, again, this is a weird case-sensitive problem, but here, old item, the I is capitalized, and here, the I is not capitalized. So I think that may be our problem here. So let's run that again. So hopefully this time we'll actually be able to edit items. So I'm going to create a couple of items, click on an item, see how I could edit this. Awesome. So now we saw that bug, let's move on to our next bug. So I'm going to run my app and try to see what works and what doesn't work and go from there. So I'm going to create some items, click on it, nothing's crashed yet, so I want to change this to 1, 2, 3 now. Oh, okay, so the editing function is not quite working now. Notice how when I clicked on this and I tried to change it to 1, 2, 3, the change wasn't propagated and updated in this screen. Okay, so now let's figure out what's going on here. So we're in our main activity, and we pass it an old item, and we know that part works because when we click on it, we can still see this exact thing here. So we know that part works and everything there works. So something is going wrong, starting with when we click the save button in edit item activity. So when we click on the save button, we call this method change to do item, and then once we call this method, we grab the text that's currently in our edit text view, and we put it into our intent with this new item extra. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter for all kinds of messages. I'm just going to delete everything here, but I'm going to add some log messages to see what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print out log messages with this tag of my name, and then I'm going to try to see what exactly edit item activity is trying to pass to main activity. So I'm going to try to print out what this string exactly is. And then back in main activity, in my on activity result, I also want to see if this thing is set to anything. So I want to see what this string will print out to be and see if it matches what we expect it to be. So I'm going to run my app again. This time, I'm only going to look for error messages with my specific log tag, which is caring. So this way, I will only see log messages that I care about. So I'm going to create some strings, some items in my list. I'm going to click on it to edit it. So when I click on it, everything is fine. I'm going to change this to 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to click the save button. Okay, so, oh, that's interesting. So it looks like only this message printed out, but we expected this message to also print out. But something is not right because we never got inside this if block, right? We only got here, and we passed back the correct string, but back here in our main activities on activity result, we actually don't ever seem to get into this method. So I'm going to just put in some more log messages to figure out what's going on here. And then I'm gonna check to see what the result code and the request code also is, just to see why we're not going inside this block. Okay, so now I'm gonna run my app again and see what kind of messages come out. I'm also gonna make sure I click on this trash icon. So, okay, so to clear my log path. Okay, now let's add some items. Let's try to edit this. So 1, 2, 3. We click save. Okay, so we called this. We pass back 1, 2, 3, and then we get here. We know we're inside onActivity result. Our result code is 0 and our request code is 20. So let's see what result OK actually is. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to use my shortcut Command B to see what this is defined as. And now I see, oh, okay, the result OK is actually -1. So -1 is not what we got here. What we got is 0, and 0 means result canceled. So we need to somehow actually set the result OK to be -1 when we pass back. Oh, okay, so now I remember that over here I'm actually not using anything inside my data. So I create this intent and I put this extra information in it, and then I call finish, but then I'm not actually like setting the result or setting anything to tell main activity that, hey, we processed your information and now you're ready to take my information. So I think what we're missing here is the set result. So we have to say result OK so that main activity knows that we were able to successfully pass it data, and then we also want to actually pass it this intent we created that we never ended up using. So this intent, if you realize, I just realized right now that we created this intent and we put some extra information in it, but we actually don't pass it back. And that's probably also one of the main reasons why our code became buggy. So I'm going to try this again and see if it works. So I'm going to create an item, try to edit it. Awesome. Okay, so great. So that worked. And now we can see using our log messages that first we passed the 1, 2, 3 string, and then we call onActivity result here, and then we got our result code and our request code here. And finally, we were able to actually get inside the string. So that's pretty neat. And notice that now our result code is actually -1. So it was 0 before, but since we set result here and set it to actually be result OK, we were able to process it fine in main activity. Okay, cool. So now let's move on to our last bug. So I'm going to run my app and see what happens. Okay, I'm going to create some items. Then I'm going to try to edit this item to be a bit longer. So that's kind of weird. I thought I clicked on the second one, but it seems like it's the first one that got updated. So I'm just going to create some new items and see what goes on. Okay, so now I have a bunch of items. I'm going to click on the ZZZ, and I want to update it to maybe XXX instead. So it's kind of weird because now I realize that when I click on an item, no matter, it seems like whatever I update, only the first item is being updated. So I'm just going to try again and see if that's actually the case. So now I'm expecting like the second to last item to be updated. But yeah, the first item is getting updated again. Okay, so now let's try to figure out what's going on here. So in our main activity, the first thing we do is when the item is clicked on, we create an intent, and then we put the string that the user clicked on here, and then we start this activity. Okay, so I'm just going to print out what the string that we clicked on is, just to make sure that this part is fine. Now I'm going to go into my edit item activity and make sure that we are sending back the right string. Okay, so now we have that. And then back in on active result in main activity, I want to check to see what this position is because that seems to be the bug here. And maybe I'll also just to print out what the string we got back from edit item activity was. Okay, so now I'm going to run my app and see what happens. So I'm going to create some items. And I'm going to click on an item to edit it. I'm going to change this to A. So the item I clicked on was Z in my log messages that I say here, and that's correct. So I'm going to change it to A and press the save button. So we send back the correct string, which is A. And then, so here we're still sending back the right item. And then we say edited string over here is still A, so that's correct. But the editing position is what seems to be wrong because it seems like we're setting the first position in the list always. So where is this variable used? So I'm going to close my edit item activity and just focus on main activity because it seems like that's where the problem is. So this variable, if we jump to its declaration, so if we try to see where it was actually declared, which is actually has this shortcut of Command B. So I'm going to see where it's declared. It's declared here. Now I'm going to try to find all the usages of this variable to see where it was used. So we see that when it's declared, it was for 0. So now I'm going to do Control F so I could search the whole file for every instance of this string. So we see here that it was first created here. Let's see what else it used. And then the next place it's used is on activity result. And it looks like those are the only 3 instances where it's being used. So we see that there's 3 matches. So it was the first time it was created here, and then back in on activity results. So it seems like we just created it and set it to 0, and then we're just always using it when it's set to 0. We're not actually setting it whenever the user clicks on an item. So I think the line we're missing here is that we want to actually set that variable to something that makes more sense than 0. Otherwise, it's just always going to be 0, and no matter which item the user clicks on, the item that's going to be edited is going to be the first item. So I'm going to set this to the position of the item that was clicked here, and I think that will solve our problem. So I'm going to also print out what this position is, just to make sure that we're doing things right. So now I'm going to run my app again, and create some items. Click on this item and hopefully edit it. So hopefully it's a second item that gets edited. So it says we clicked on the position of 1 item, which is correct because it's the index starts at 0. So great, that seems to have fixed our problem. So the problem here was that we weren't setting this variable to anything, and because of that, it was always just using 0 and updating the 0 position. So that was the last bug that I had for us to solve together, and hopefully by observing the process that I went through to solve these different bugs and looking at how I was able to look at the log messages, the error messages, and put in my own log messages, you have a better understanding of how to go about debugging your own apps.